Does your company have a blind spot? In their new book called Blind Spot, Nathan Shedroff and his co-authors say that many companies are missing huge business opportunities because they focus too much on the quantitative side, you know, the numbers. But the qualitative side is equally, if not more important. The doorway to understanding and developing qualitative value is called design thinking. Can you tell us a little bit about why design is so important for organizations?
Yeah, I'm certainly one to say that all of business people should be creative, and all parts of business should be creative. But obviously design is commonly recognized as sort of a creative discipline. And I think it's that way because design employs certain kinds of processes and accentuates certain kinds of perspectives in its arc of development that leads, participants, whether they're classic designers or not, leads people to new opportunities. So at its core, design is a process to see new things, see new opportunities, understand the context that our customers are in or our stakeholders are in, and then take that new perspective and make new things out of it.
Who do you think is doing design well these days?
Well, I mean, there's the usual suspects, Apple, Target, Nike, et cetera. And I rattle them off because design isn't just a department. Design is core to the strategy of the entire company. It's part of their corporate strategy to make design important in terms of the implementation, but to use design tools to understand their markets, their competition, their customers, et cetera. I think that really if you look at any successful company that has a big brand, a well-known brand, or is able to charge a lot more than their competitors for some reason, usually design is one of the reasons, if not the reason, why they're in the position to do so. Because design is a set of processes that accentuate qualitative value. You pair that with traditional business tools that are really good at measuring quantitative value, and you put those two together, then you have a complete picture of opportunity, of customer need, and of how you can approach the market and build better products and services. The last 50 years of business education and business practice has sort of relegated anything that's qualitative off to the side because it's messy and it's hard to deal with, and you can't attribute numbers to it, and therefore if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? That's the old phrase. And what we've done in the process of that is design out everything that's important about a brand, about a relationship with customers, and truly the best value that's out there. If you go to a board meeting and you look through the financials of the company, design isn't anywhere there, right? Design is sort of this nice thing that's been added at the end. And design, the companies that you mentioned, they don't approach design that way. Design is an integral part of the strategy and a partner in the strategy. It's not just this sort of thing that's off to the side. And I think that what that does for a company is it allows them to create better relationships with their customers, with their partners, with other stakeholders, even with their employees. And relationships are where all the value is. If you don't have good relationships, you don't get good value. End of story.
I love that you talk about design as a discipline, as something that cascades throughout the entire organization. That a designer is not tasked with making things beautiful necessarily, or even creating something that they want, but they have a responsibility for understanding who is using the product or service, which is a much wider definition than I think we think of.
There's really two kinds of things that we mean when we say design. One are the design disciplines: fashion design, interaction design, graphic design, industrial design. There's disciplines around the implementation of good design. And then there's this thing called design thinking, which of course we've heard a lot about in the last decade. Design thinking is about process, and anyone can be a design thinker. The design thinking process is about understanding others' needs. So I think of design as a designer more as a conductor. You're conducting all of these many choices, all of these notes. You're trying to build a symphony not for yourself. You're trying to build it for, some audience that you care deeply has the experience you want them to have.
Absolutely, and that in and of itself is the driver of growth. And so when we think about innovation, so often we go to, well, how can technology fuel my innovation strategy?
And technology is an incredible enabler, and we're literally in the center of Silicon Valley right this moment. But the dirty little secret of Silicon Valley is that probably 90% or more of every startup has failed. And it's usually not because it's poorly engineered. It's usually because, yeah, it's cool, but nobody really needs it or wants it. If you want to be successful in business, yeah, you pay attention to the technology and what it enables you to do, but you also have to do it in the service of some sort of customer or market need, or else you better be a nonprofit.
I want to go back to this notion of design being a discipline that we can learn. So you, about 10 years ago, had an idea to start a very new kind of graduate school, this MBA in design strategy, housed in a 100-year-old art school in San Francisco. Can you talk a little bit about how you got this idea that A, we needed a different kind of business education, and that business education needed to have more tenets of an arts and crafts model of learning rather than how we typically think about business leadership and business education?
Quite frankly, having been to business school, I feel like I can be a little bit critical here. I think business schools are stuck in the 80s in terms of their curriculum and their pedagogy, how they teach, but especially what they teach. And it all needs to be updated for the 21st century. Here we are, 17 years into the 21st century. We're still teaching in a surprising number of MBA programs, if not the tools from 2 or 3 decades ago, certainly the philosophies from 2 or 3 decades ago. And I got an opportunity that none of my colleagues got to do. We got to make an MBA program from scratch for the 21st century, and it was easy to integrate at the core things like sustainability and systems thinking, design thinking and innovation strategies, new approaches to leadership, new understandings of what the role of business should be in the first place in a society in the 21st century.
It's more like mastering business ambiguity than mastering business administration, which really speaks to what you were saying. The kinds of business problems that we're facing these days are much more about solving novel problems that are filled with ambiguity, complexity, and uncertainty. Very different than, as you said, the old models of just applying some tools that help you analyze the problem.
Part of the fact that this MBA program lives in an art and design school, and part of the reason why it's called an MBA in design strategy, is that we take a very designerly approach to business. And one of the things that comes out of a design studio is that you learn by doing. So we have very few cases, we don't read a lot of books, we throw our students into situations over and over in design processes. So it's just second nature to use these processes and these tools to apply to different kinds of opportunities. That learning by doing is really important.
I want to build on that a little bit. Can you tell us about some specific skills that designers might have, or even that the students learn? So, for example, they're not looking for questions that are just trying to converge to an answer, but they're willing to ask the open-ended, more purpose-driven questions that try to get to a different place.
So you're talking about qualitative research, right?
Yes.
And that's critical, because if you don't look at things in new ways, there's no way that you're going to come up with new opportunities. So that kind of expansive, divergent thinking and research, inquiry into the world is where a lot of the raw materials come for the next phase that's so important, which is reframing. This is the hardest thing for traditional business people to do. Reframing is all about saying, wow, when we were out in the field, we didn't see what we thought we would see. We saw all this other stuff, and that causes you necessarily to question whether the frame you have, the understanding of the market you have, is the right one. And the chances are there's a better one that leads you to new opportunities. That's where the ambiguity is. If you're not comfortable with that ambiguity, if you're not comfortable going back to your boss and saying, I know you asked us to do this, but we found that that's not really a good question, but we found a better question that we think will lead us in other places. It takes a certain amount of courage. So that shift, that reframing, is what design's all about. Designers tend to be fairly comfortable doing that.
I wonder if you could maybe give us an example of it in action.
I'll give you a semi-hypothetical example. Let's say Ford automobile company, a car and truck company. Their frame is, we're a car and truck company, that's what we make, that's what we sell. But we know nowadays that that model is changing drastically because of services like, well, certainly rental cars for decades, but now we have car share, now we have ride share. People aren't buying as many cars. So if they stick to that frame, they're in trouble. The opportunity here is to reframe themselves and say, well, maybe we're not just a car and truck company, maybe we're a transportation company, and that affords us different kinds of opportunities, new opportunities. That may mean that they get into new businesses, they redesign their products to be appropriate to those uses, they create new services, and maybe they start investing in ride-sharing companies and car share companies and autonomy and all other kinds of things that aren't maybe about just selling more cars and trucks. Then you have a company like Tesla come along and say, well, we're not a car company at all, even though we make cars. We're a transportation experience company, and the software is as important, if not more important, than the hardware is, right? And now they can do things that no car company in the world's ever been able to do. Update your car while you sleep, right? They can do things because they have a different frame of what their intersection with the market is. Someday maybe they'll have to reframe too. So there's qualitative research that allows you to reframe. From then on in, it's prototype and iterate until you feel like you're close enough to maybe launch something.
So we talk a lot about learning by doing, rapid cycles of iteration, feedback, and design, but actually learning how to give and receive constructive critique is a skill in and of itself. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen work well when it comes to productive critique?
Well, I don't think, unfortunately, even for designers, we're never taught how to critique well. We just go through enough critiques that we sort of get used to it and you kind of feel your way around. But it's certainly a learnable skill. It's a teachable skill. Part of the importance of critique is to learn to disassociate yourself from the work. I made this work, or we made this work, but any reflection, any critique or criticism about the work isn't necessarily a reflection of me. It's a reflection of where the work is in this moment. I want input from all over because there are people who understand and see the world in ways that I just can't, and they're going to see things that aren't there, and that's a good thing. Not a criticism of me. It's a good thing because they're here to make this thing that I care about better in some way that I can't do myself. Why wouldn't you want that, right? But you have to reframe it for yourself that this isn't about my worth as a human or my skills as a professional, and my responsibility isn't to do it all by myself.
I think people don't realize it takes time to learn how to work with other people that are different than you, that have different skills, different backgrounds, and to use what they can give you, in essence, as a gift.
Well, and to recognize that your skills are needed in some of these parts, but where you're particularly strong isn't necessarily needed at all times, right?
All right, I want to turn a little bit to your latest book that you wrote called Blind Spot, which zeroes in on those qualitative qualities that you talked about earlier. And you talk about it as premium value, that there are some organizations like Disney, for example, that have really understood and built into their way of operating, of innovating, to focus on the customer relationship. So tell us a little bit about blind spot and how you even came up with the term blind spot to describe this thing that is often invisible to many, but so critical to driving innovation and growth.
Well, I think this is the logical outcome of my personal experience in design and business and Steve and Sean's experience in their professional lives, where we work with companies as consultants or inside companies, and we're not having the right conversations. The numbers are never the story. They're really important parts of the story. They back up the story, but the story is elsewhere. And if all you do is spend time looking and measuring at the numbers, the functional value and the financial value, you miss the rest of the story. There's all this stuff that you can't measure, like emotions and identity and meaning, that gets ignored or that we don't see because it's literally not in the books of the company. When you have a financial report, that qualitative stuff, the rest of the story, it's not being told at all. So it's really easy for business people to be blind to it or to just ignore it altogether, even though they have a little voice in the back of their head that says, I think there's something else here.
Yes.
It's those people that listen to that voice that are able to see a new opportunity.
And to your point of how designers see the world, if you make visible those things like identity, meaning, and emotion, then they become a different part of the equation of how you think about your organization.
As anyone in business should know, you're creating a story with your customers. And it's not unlike a screenplay, right? Your audience is going on a journey, and you want them to feel certain things, and then you want to surprise them, and then it's okay if they maybe are a little confused, because then the elation of understanding what's going on and being filled in, and that's a journey that is emotional. And when you do that really well, it's very satisfying. Music is the same way, like symphonic music. You're taking people on a musical journey, but it plays to them at the level of emotions and a couple other qualitative values. Well, if you can design that relationship, that's it. That's everything you're doing. That's what every company in the world should be doing. Design the relationship. You're not designing the product. You're not designing the service flow. It's not like a user journey. You're designing a relationship for whatever period of time, including a lifetime relationship,
yes.
which Disney sits and thinks about. How are we engaging people from 3 all the way up to 90? That's part of their strategy.
Absolutely, and I just love how you bring Disney into the book. As a kid, I was fascinated with Disney, and I read as much as I could about it, and one of the most amazing small things I remember learning was how they don't let their characters in their theme parks be visible out of costume to the guests. And that attention to detail, that once you break that narrative, once you break that wave line, where as a child you see a character that might have their mask off, it takes away the magic. And Disney is all about magic.
And there's only one in the park at once. Like they time the replacement Mickey Mouse to come up right as the current Mickey Mouse goes away, so there's never more than one Mickey Mouse, right? And Disney's incredible at this. They train all of their park personnel, everyone in the park, from a character, someone playing a character, to a waitress or a server, to the janitor, has what they call character training. And this does a really powerful thing. It means that any Disney employee is empowered to reset the relationship. Someone drops their ice cream cone, there are people around that they're off the wavelength now, right? They're out of the narrative. So there are people empowered to get that child back on the narrative. Something bad happens, something's not quite right. Everyone in the park is empowered to help people get back on the wavelength, get back on the relationship that they've designed. That's incredibly powerful. One of the biggest misnomers in business is that they think that they're in a certain kind of class. We're a product company, we're a service company. Those companies over there, like Disney or whatever, they're an experience company. And what they don't realize is, no, all there is are experience companies. Every company, every organization creates experiences. If you don't think you're an experience company, it means you're probably creating really crappy experiences because you're not paying attention to it. The qualitative value is probably more important than the quantitative value. And we certainly see that in cases of startups being sold, like Instagram being sold to Facebook for this ridiculous, extra $1 billion at the time. It seemed ridiculous. Now it looks like a bargain, right? Or when companies go public and they have this huge amount of value. That's the qualitative value that's doing that. It's not the quantitative value. But that value only gets exchanged in the context of a relationship. No relationships, no value, period. So everyone's in the relationship business, whether they think they are or not, whether they're paying attention to their relationships or not. And then lastly, there's the experience, because you can't have a relationship without some kind of experience. So every business is in the relationship business and the experience business. It's not just special categories of companies.